Hey John, thanks for the video. I gotta make this quick. I'm waiting for my Mexican food. But anyway, I wanted to respond, and I think I can quickly to your video. So you have some questions, or maybe I should say it seems like the biggest factor in your belief is the sort of uncaused cause, right? Okay. Fine. And all my point is with the uncaused cause is when we say we don't know. Like if we look at something, we come upon a car crash and we see the aftermath. We could speculate as to who ran the red light, or if that was even the cause, and why did all these parts end up where they ended up, and why is that car on its roof? We can speculate, but the answer is we don't know. And that's all I mean when I'm talking about the argument from ignorance. It's not the argument from stupidity, like you're too stupid. It's the argument from not knowing the answer. So pointing to God and saying, I know the answer is God because that's the most likely or whatever. That is kind of that's hard for me to accept, because not only does it feel like a lack of imagination, but it looks like the science, forget science, right? What we understand about the physical world all demonstrates a physical world. We may not, living in a universe like this with these four fundamental forces and the properties of those four fundamental forces, life may be the only possible outcome for a world like that. So just something to consider. And so when we don't know what it is, the only reasonable answer is I don't know. Now, just because you have a book that says God did it, but doesn't describe how or why, is clearly wrong about the mechanisms and what happened first and when it all happened and so on and so forth, the Bible is not a good reason to go on assuming that that God is the right God, or that God had anything to do with creating the universe. That's my point of view. You said God is the best explanation. I'm saying that's basically pure lack of imagination. God doesn't really explain anything. So like if God did it, okay. I mean, let's just assume that that's the only possible explanation. We know nothing about the natural world or how anything works, how the reproduction of life works. We know nothing about chemistry. We know nothing about astronomy or cosmology or any of those things. Fine. The only answer we can come up with is that a God did it. Well, what does that explain? How, why, when, who, which God? Does this God care about us? How do we get from assuming a God or whatever the definition of that God is, some highly creative, intelligent being created the universe, or what is the God? I don't know. How did that come into existence? I agree with you. Science is not an argument for atheism. But what science does, it informs us of how things work. And by the way, how things work. And by the way, science is not a bad thing. Science is how it's an extrapolation of how we live our lives. It's through investigation and inference and like when, we've talked about this before, I think, but when you're a child and your mom tells you not to put your hand on the stove because you'll burn it, you don't understand any of that, right? You don't. I mean, I don't know what a burn is. I kind of, maybe it sounds like it's bad. I guess I don't want to do that, but I don't know what hot is. Just have no frame of reference for those things. But as kids, we start to understand, oh, I touched the car handle, the car door handle getting in the car, and that was hot, right? And my mom told me, be careful when you touch that, it's gonna be hot. Okay, so now I know what hot is, now I know not to touch, now I know why I shouldn't touch the stove, so on and so forth. It's just this induction and inference, and so science, like, in itself, is not a bad thing, I don't think. But yet I agree with you. Knowing how things work doesn't explain the origin, and I completely agree with you. There are many possibilities as to the origin of both the universe, if it ever had an origin. Like, we talk about the Big Bang, but there is a point that we can't see past in the Big Bang. So, in other words, it's like hearing the bang and turning around to look, right? Oh, but the explosion has already started. We don't know how big the bomb was. We don't know if it was, like, it's so hard to think of. It's hard to communicate. I'm not a science communicator, but imagine that one of the potential theories, the math points to this idea that the universe is constantly in, like, ebb and flow, and it can compress to a certain point and then it expands again. That's all we see. And so we don't know if there was a singularity. We don't know anything past what's called the Planck time. I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure you understand all about it, so I don't need to go into that. But the answer is we don't know. So to say even that the universe had an origin may not make sense. Not only that, but if you take someone like Lawrence Krauss's view on the origin of the universe, he talks about a universe from nothing, which I'm sure you've heard. This is a great argument for theists. Nothing comes from nothing. I know. Except nothing isn't, the nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about is not the nothing that you and I intuitively think of when we think of nothing. There's nothing in my hand. Well, there actually is a lot of shit in my hand, right? It just, you can't see it. But with the right tools, you can investigate it. We just don't have the right tools. We don't know enough about the quantum yet to get into that. With respect to the paranormal, I basically am surmising that you're asking me to explain why I believe my experience wasn't paranormal. Well, I suppose it could have been, but the thing is, we were running multiple audio recorders, and part of what we do in these investigations as a forensic, we're not forensic scientists. Let's be clear on that. I'm not a scientist. I'm a hobbyist. I'm a lay person who knows some shit about some shit. And so, but what we do is as close to a forensic examination of the evidence as possible. So in the moment, I absolutely was convinced that we had heard a woman's voice, a disembodied woman's voice, say, "Help me." And but in the after I tore the room apart and I heard Daryl's guts making this noise again, that's when I realized, oh God, it was his guts, and I just experienced this pareidolia. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but I could be not. I'm experiencing, and so what is more likely? Is it more likely that there actually is a disembodied voice in the room that is trying to communicate with us, breaking the known and testable laws of physics, or is it more likely that I'm experiencing a well-known and understood and common phenomenon where I picked a bit of English, my native language, out of the noise that I heard. What's my degree of confidence? I would say 80%. I'm 80% sure that maybe 85, I'm probably 85%, 90% sure that my experience was not paranormal. That does leave a 10% gap. But how would I know? So what we did is we go back and we listen to the recording, and we've got the audio files, and we play it back, and it doesn't sound like "help me." It doesn't sound like anything. It sounds like, "Oh yeah," so what is it? Again, is it more likely that the laws of physics and the laws of sound have now been altered so that the recording is bad? Or did I experience pareidolia, which again is a well-known and experienced phenomenon? I think it's more likely that my brain did what it did, tried to pick information out of the noise, but again, it's possible that my experience was paranormal. You asked the question, and I think this is the most important question you could ask. How do I know my conclusion is correct? How do I know my conclusion is correct? I love this question. This is my favorite question. I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about 100% certainty, I don't have 100% certainty. If we're talking about 90% certainty, yeah, I'm 90% certain. But people win the lottery with way less odds than that. So yeah, it could have been paranormal. But I'm 90% sure that it was not paranormal, and that I don't have to worry about it. I think if everybody asks this question on religion, on politics, on watching the nightly news, on every single thing, if they said, how do I know my conclusion is correct? And they did that math and they worked backwards to figure out what was true and what was not true, man, the world would be a lot better place. You talked about your hallucinations. Okay, so I've had lots of hallucinations, but that's because I used to really love LSD. Loved LSD. I've had plenty of hallucinations, and I agree with you. When you have taken a drug, or when you experience sleep deprivation. I've never had hallucinations on that, but I have had hallucinations from accidentally taking too much NyQuil. And of course my intentional LSD use. You're right. There is something that tells you, hey, either I remember that I took this drug, or I know that something's just off. This is not my normal experience, and it doesn't feel external or bad or dangerous or. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that these experiences, they do kind of stand out as different. But like when I heard that voice say, help me, sometimes we can be wrong. We can be confused about what we perceive. And that's the whole point. Your brain, your senses are the final arbiter of everything that you see and everything that you interpret. And what's interesting about drugs, for example, is did you know that it's not like the actual LSD that makes your brain do funny things? The chemicals to make your brain do funny things are already in your head. They're already there, and it's the LSD activates them. It turns on receptors and turns off other receptors. And lets the normal, or forces the normal brain chemistry to be altered to such a degree that you experience a trip, right? What that means is other circumstances, other chemicals, other situations could cause hallucinations. What kind of word is that? Hallucinations that seem perfectly real, but you're like, hey, I'm not overtired. I haven't dropped acid. I haven't taken too much NyQuil. Did that shit actually happen or not? How could I know? I could ask my friend John, who's sitting next to me. John, did you see that purple dragon pop out of the street? No, you didn't? All right, I must be tripping. But again, we could be wrong. John might have been looking out the window. You know, who knows? So it's, again, with beliefs, for me, it's not nothing. I'm not 100% certain on anything. There's a level or a degree of confidence that I am willing to accept. You said that Ravi Zacharias said that truth is that which conforms to reality. Are you sure that Ravi actually said that? Because I've never agreed with a word that Ravi Zacharias has said, and I completely agree with him. So how do we find out what conforms with reality? Well, the only way to do it, because we are subject to being wrong about so much shit, is to ask John, to ask these other people, hey, if you drop a pen, do you experience that pen falling? Me too. So we're not crazy about that. Do you see that bright light in the sky? Is that a star or is that a UFO? Oh, you think it's a UFO too? Maybe it is a UFO. How could we find out? So, you know, there's all these ways that we should find out what the reality is. But for someone who is, like, say, schizophrenic, they don't know. They don't know what is real and what is not. And they have a very hard time sussing out that information, which is why it's such a kind of a bitch, right? Because they don't have a way to figure out what conforms with reality and what doesn't. Will atheists believe they are in hell? I don't know. I mean, probably not initially, for sure. I mean, but I don't see that as being a problem. You know, and that's part of the issue, right? If I am subject to hell because I just am not convinced that God doesn't exist, but he sends me there anyway, simply because I wasn't convinced, what the hell kind of God is that? I'm not a bad guy. I don't do terrible things. You know, like Jeffrey Dahmer had a jailhouse conversion. If Christian theology is true, he's at the right hand of Jesus, while I would go to hell. Where is the justice? And what is the point? Because I really would just be being punished for the belief or lack of belief, I think. What am I saying when I say Bigfoot could exist? I am saying that because I have not investigated, because the world has not found a great deal of evidence that supports the idea of a Bigfoot, I believe there are no Bigfoots. I still don't know. What is the plural of Bigfoot? Anywho, can I claim to know that there are no Bigfoots? No. Should I consider Bigfoot attack when I go camping? No, I wouldn't. Because I don't believe they exist. I'm not afraid of them, so on and so forth. You said it's impossible for God to lie. Why? You know, God doesn't lie directly, I don't think. But here's some Bible verses for you to go look at. Go look at 1 Kings 22:2, 2 Chronicles 18:22, Jeremiah 4:10, Jeremiah 27, Ezekiel 14:9, 2 Thessalonians 2:11. God is doing quite a bit of deceiving in those verses, and so if deception is not a lie, and so here's the problem, right? We're talking apologetics. You're gonna have an answer for this. I won't be satisfied with it. Probably. I mean, I just had to do a quick Google search. So you may be able to make some points there, but I probably won't be satisfied. And so, you know, you say that God can't lie, but God should be able to lie. Why wouldn't he be able to lie? If it suits his ends, why not? I mean, what if God had to tell us a lie to keep us safe or whatever? I don't know, whatever. That is not, I don't care so much about that. I wouldn't expect or need a God to be perfect to believe in him. I would just need to know, to have access to whether he's there or not. And if he is, then I want to believe in him. That's basically it. So, and by the way, yes, I love the videos, so keep them coming. I gotta go get my food. See ya. Bye.